The Ring 2, spelled out TWO kind of annoyingly, I don't know why, it just annoys me, is directed by Hideo Nakata, who directed the original Ring. It's written by Aaron Kruger, stars Naomi Watts, David Dorfman, and Simon Baker. And The Ring 2 takes place a year after the first film, and Rachel and her son Aidan have relocated to Seattle but find themselves chased once again by Samara. I can only imagine how excited people must have been back in like 2005 or earlier when they heard that Hideo Nakata was going to do the sequel to the American version of The Ring. However, The Ring as a franchise is like a lot of other horror franchises in that they work well when they're just like one isolated movie, but once they start to cash in and start to create sequels, they just go off the rails. And here, they really dropped the ball. It is an incredibly boring movie that lacks almost completely a sense of dread, although it does have maybe some interesting ideas in there. It's not a good movie. Now, the first thing you'll notice about The Ring 2 compared to its predecessor is that it looks completely different. The cinematography here this time is from Gabriel Beristain, who strangely does not follow the first film's cue in terms of how to, make this movie look. Instead, like, this movie is no longer drenched in those metallic tones, so it's just not creepy anymore. The Ring 2 has a slightly bigger budget than The Ring 1, and it's definitely more reliant on visual effects, but none of these images are scary, none of them are disturbing, and because it's not interesting visually speaking, it adds to the biggest problem with The Ring 2, which is that it is extremely, extremely slow-paced. And I know I said that in the first movie, like, the slow pace helped it because it was, more of a mystery film. Here, it's not the same sort of story, so I kind of wanted it to be faster paced, because here it's not like Naomi Watts' character is, investigating that much, and it's not like a procedural. It's really more of like a straight sort of horror movie. And I don't just mean that the story is slow paced, I mean that it takes about an hour literally for the main conflict to be introduced and for Naomi Watts' character to realize that she has to do something about it. It's just not suspenseful anymore, and that's really baffling, because you would think that having Hideo Nakata at the helm of this movie would just mean that things would naturally become creepy, but that is not the case. Unfortunately, and I hate to say this, The Ring 2 really does come across like a half-assed horror sequel. And what do horror sequels have? They have jump scares. And whereas the first Ring had maybe like a couple of them that were unnecessary, here there seem to be a lot more, at least to me, that of course are accompanied by really loud sounds. The jump scares don't really make sense within context of the story. And if you were to ask me, like, if I had to write this movie, if I had to direct it, what would I do to make it a good movie? First of all, I wouldn't do a sequel to The Ring, because you cannot do a sequel to The Ring. It's tough to continue this sort of story that works as, its own self-contained sort of campfire storyness. But if I had no choice, I would go weirder and weirder. I would take it like really bizarre, get really eerie, because that's what worked with the first movie. But here, The Ring 2 really feels like a step back into safe territory. The sense of mystery is gone, and perhaps most disappointingly, Samara is no longer this ambiguous threat, but she is this generic, vengeful horror movie monster, which is disappointing because she's a character, and they could have developed her a lot more than they did here. Aaron Kruger's script is also to blame for this, because the plot doesn't really feel like a natural progression of the series from the first movie. I mean, it does put the characters in a different situation, but it's just that lore-wise, things don't really make a lot of internal sense anymore. Samara suddenly just has these vague superpowers. In the first movie, it was already weird enough that she could psychically create videotapes, but here she can do like everything. However, perhaps the biggest strength that The Ring 2 has going for it is that somewhere in like the second half of the movie, they begin to introduce little things for the characters that are genuinely intriguing, and I wish that they could have really committed to these elements throughout the entire movie. They begin to put in that like allegorical stuff that I was looking for in the first movie. They put in things about child abuse and, the sacrifices a parent has to make. These things aren't maximized, unfortunately, but for brief moments in the second hour of The Ring 2, you really begin to feel sort of more interested about the characters. In terms of acting, Naomi Watts is fine, although she has even less character to work with. Because Martin Henderson is no longer in this movie, she has no real co-star to bounce off of when she's doing most of her somewhat investigating work. Instead, the other main star of this movie is David Dorfman, who again plays Aidan, And to his credit, he is significantly better here than he was in the first movie. Because here he's allowed to act like a real child for once, who reacts realistically to scary stuff that's happening around him. He still has those moments where he goes really wide-eyed and speaks like really strangely. But for the most part, he's definitely better here than he was in the last one. But as a whole, The Ring 2 is just a bad movie. It is so hard to recommend to people just because it is so punishingly boring, and the way it advances the lore isn't that interesting. However, if you thought this movie is going to be bad, just wait till I review Rings, the third movie in the American franchise. Look forward to that. Alright, so those are my thoughts on The Ring 2. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whatever you guys think, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.